Hey there, folks. Welcome to another edition of Stranger in a Southern Land. I, of course, am your host, Jake Manning. Today in the program, I speak with Justin from Burntshirt Vineyard out of Hendersonville, North Carolina. This is a fantastic conversation, and I'm very excited to bring this to you, mostly because, and no disrespect to Jason from Brushy Mountain Vineyard, winery, excuse me. Wineries and vineyards, I get mixed up all the time because I've done a lot of them. I've spoken with Alan from St. Paul Mountain Vineyard, as well as Chris from Fair Game. No disrespect to those gentlemen that I just listed, but I have to say this conversation with Justin is probably the best one I've done with a winery or a vineyard person there is, because Justin was very good at dumbing down the whole idea of how you make wine. Alan was very smart, and I don't think I quite grasp everything. I don't think that's Alan's fault. I think that's my fault for not being very educated on viticulture and everything that goes into wine making. But Justin was able to dumb it all down for me. And also Justin gave me a good insight on running like a small business, about, quality control, producing a product out of a small business, and, the ins and outs of that, and how do you produce a product under a small budget, under a small staff, but still maximizing your quality. And Justin definitely discussed that in great detail. And, anybody that runs a small business, I highly recommend this podcast because, not only is, Justin a great winemaker, but he is also the person that is very smart when it comes to maximizing everything you got as far as small businesses. So, it's just a good podcast that way too. And those are the type of people that I love, talking to, is people that are doing something, making something happen with the tools they have in front of them. So, they are producing a fantastic product out there in Burntshirt Vineyard. So if you're around in the area, especially the Hendersonville area, make sure you go up there. And also too, St. Paul Mountain Vineyard is just right around the corner, so you can hit both of them in the same day. So I highly recommend, making a trip out to Hendersonville, North Carolina, and checking out those two wineries. Also, because they're fans of the show, they were able to gracious enough to talk to me. So I appreciate them, and, hopefully you appreciate them. So anyways, another people that I appreciate is Stranger in a Southern Land guest Nick Alexander, who is the sponsor of this program because he is producing a show, Tree Monstrous Comedy Wednesdays, which is a comedy show that is happening every Wednesday at Tremont Music Hall until they close. That's right. Nick Alexander is bringing, nationally touring acts to Charlotte, North Carolina, and Tremont Music Hall until they close. And that date's kind of coming up here pretty soon. In December, they'll be closing their doors. But in the meantime, Nick is, producing a lot of comedy shows, and he's doing it every Wednesday here in Charlotte, North Carolina at the Tremont Music Hall until they close. And actually, I will be performing at one of the Tremont shows before they close on December 2nd, so make sure you show up for that. But speaking of shows that I'll be performing on, this is, Thanksgiving weekend, so happy Turkey Day to you and yours. But this is a very busy weekend for me. There's a lot of wrestling coming up. I must let you know that the Beckley, West Virginia show for Big Time Wrestling will not be happening. That got canceled. So please don't be in Beckley, West Virginia this Friday. I won't be there, and nor will a Wrestling Ring or the other people will be there. But on Saturday, November 28th, Morganton, North Carolina is still going on. Big Time Wrestling. Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Ricky Steamboat, and many more people will be there. So make sure you show up this Saturday, November 28th, for Big Time Wrestling in Morganton, North Carolina. And then this Sunday, November 29th, is the big Queens of Combat PWX double shot. I think Queens of Combat kicks off around 1 o'clock, but do check the website, combatqueens.com. We'll be doing a show over there for a couple hours, and then we'll kick everybody out, wait 5 minutes, and then let everybody back in for the PWX show that night. And of course, PWX Pro is the information on that. So make sure you get those tickets in those both places on those two websites, because it's going to be a double shot right there the Sunday after Thanksgiving, November 29th. Then, like I said, Tree Monstrous Comedy Wednesdays for me. I will be performing December 2nd. It is an all-star lineup. Everybody that's done very well on all the Tremont shows, Nick's bringing them back, one last time before they close the doors over there at Tremont. So make sure you show up for that. Then also, too, as soon as I'm done with that show at Tremont, I got to pack up. I got to head to the Northeast for another Big Time Wrestling show in Jamestown, New York. That'll be that Thursday, which will be December the 3rd. And then December the 4th, I will be in Altoona, Pennsylvania, also for Big Time Wrestling. And of course, the information for that is btwpro.com. And if there's any changes to those dates, make sure you follow me on social media for those changes. And you can follow me on social media. I am available on Twitter at ManScoutManning, and on Instagram at ManScoutManning. If you have a question about the podcast, make sure you email me at jake@sslshow.com. Or if you want to book me for an upcoming wrestling event, make sure you email me at manscoutmanning@yahoo.com. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump into this wonderful podcast with Justin from Burntshirt Vineyard out of Hendersonville, North Carolina, here on Stranger in a Southern Land. All right, I'm sitting here with Justin from Burntshirt Winery, or is it Vineyard?
Burntshirt Vineyard. Yes,
Vineyard,
sir.
okay. That's my big thing is it winery, is it a vineyard? But I keep in mind that since it's the farm and you're bringing in the grapes, it's a vineyard. So
Quite all right.
So anyways, thank you for taking time to talk to me today. Is it a busy day today?
Absolutely. It's a very busy day. So we're on site here. We are pressing our traminette today. We've got close to 2 tons running in the press out back, and it's the
harvest.
actual
pressing of the grapes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the actual process of going from basically fruit to juice, and it's everything that once we get it in the tank, we're actually able to work with getting our fermentations going, and that's one step closer to wine. So you got to start on the crush pad, and it's our press is fantastic. It's about a 2-hour cycle, so you and I have some downtime here to chat in between loading and unloading.
So I got you in between here.
Yeah.
They're very clever. Now, okay, that's step one. What's step two? Since we're getting the step method right now.
Absolutely. So step 2 is really introducing our commercial yeast strain, giving it some nutrients, and maintaining quality fermentation through temperature regulation. And that can take anywhere from 10 days to 14 days. So at the end of that, we're really working our way towards cellaring it, cleaning it up. You might say after 3 weeks from actually getting that juice in the tank, we're working our way towards ideally a bottling next spring. So as long as you keep marching towards that time frame, it's something that it really helps us get through the winter. As far as cellaring goes, again, it's really a matter of settling it out and then kind of cleaning it up. But given some time, it's helpful. You could do it faster, but we like to just take it easy, let the wine kind of guide itself. So
yeah, obviously, and of course, we are recording this coming into the fall, so that's probably your busy time of harvesting everything. Especially we're in the mountains where it's already gotten pretty cold all of a sudden, so you have to deal with a lot of temperature issues. And you're talking about just dealing with temperatures right now. Like, what are your things you're trying to avoid right now with just the change in temperature up here in the mountains of North Carolina?
So right now, what we're looking at largely in western North Carolina, we're seeing with this most recent cold front that came through, some high 70s and lows in the upper 40s, and that's really great weather for ripening. We've had so far a pretty warm year. It's been warm, I'd say hot for the mountains, and we've also had a little bit of a decreased rainfall for this year, which has been fantastic. But as we move into this time frame, what we're seeing is sugars are accumulating. So the plant is starting to store more and more sugar in the berry itself. And if you think of it, each little berry is almost like its own suitcase. There's only so much room that you can pack stuff in there. So as our sugars increase, our acids are going to start to fall out just a little bit. And one thing that helps maintain good acidity, though, is cool weather. So right now, I feel like we are finding a very sweet balance in some of the fruit that we're getting this year.
Okay, so the weather is really working to your favor this year, is what you're saying.
It is, and I'll knock on wood.
Yeah, we'll knock on wood.
We're not out of it yet. We're in the middle of it.
But anyways, and of course we have the barrels just behind us, and I just did a recent interview with Fair Game, and I pointed right at a barrel. I'm like, what happens if this barrel goes bad? And all of a sudden there was this like, don't say that barrel's going to go bad, because there is a lot of time that you just, once you get through this stuff you're doing right now and we get to these barrels that are just behind us, you're just sitting around waiting.
You could definitely say that, and the best way I like to approach it is that we have a checklist almost, and that checklist is not only tied to the time of year, but also the timing in that wine's life. And the longer you allow the product to sit in an environment where, say, it's exposed to additional oxygen, that's a huge space where you can start to look at something spoiling, so to speak. So your main objective is to, a full barrel is a happy barrel. And when it's empty, you got to tend to it and keep it clean. We did that yesterday, actually. We broke down this whole stack and treated them all. And then with anything that's in the cellar right now, for example, some of our 13 reds, we have some 2014 reds that are still in barrel. All of those barrels were very recently filled all the way to the brim so that there is no air inside that container at all. And that's kind of what allows you to step away from it for a few months until we can get through harvest, and then we'll be back in the cellar starting to tinker a little bit. So
okay, so you are very naive. When I've interviewed a lot of wineries, but I'm very naive in the whole process of it.
Okay.
So that's why I'm asking the questions.
That's okay.
Because hopefully I will be more educated. Now, when you put it in the barrels, you say you take it out, or you let it sit there until it goes in the bottle?
So the best way to look at the aging process is that there is a almost popular conception, and then there's the reality of it.
Okay.
The popular conception is that it's spending months, if not years, in that container, and that's the truth. Outside of that, though, there is a very, very small window where we're making sure that the wine has consistency, but also that it that it has a good preservation. So in those barrels, we will move the large volumes into tank and blend one single lot. And so if there's 8 barrels in a lot, we'll blend that whole volume in a tank at some point in its life, maybe 2 or 3 times throughout its aging, and then we'll move it to barrel and return it back to the cellar. So it's something that, through the aging process, it largely stays in that barrel. When we prep it for bottling, though, it goes into that tank for 2 months before we actually are ready to say, hey, let's bottle it up. It's stable. It's a product that we know is clean, clear, and it's worthy of being in the bottle for years now. So that's probably the most time consuming on the back end of aging that wine, is going through cold stability and making sure that the wine itself is wholesome. Because you can play around with the idea that you could unfilter the wine and just put it in the bottle, but at that point, you're kind of doing a little bit of a biological roll of the dice, and
because that's what it seems like to me.
That.
Like when I get it explained to me that it's like, okay, we put in this barrel and then we put it in a bottle. Like that seems like a pretty big gamble. Like especially if you're going to run an operation like what you guys got here. It's a very large operation.
So, and we are in the 5,000 to 6,000 case range. So this facility itself can produce in a year, can handle close to 15,000 gallons, give or take some of the volume that we're working with. The level of storage that we have in barrel, our barrel program this year is going to gracefully grow to well over 230 to 240 barrels. And that's a huge amount of volume and storage. And in addition to that, all of our tanked wines, anything that we've got in stainless steel, thankfully we have a fantastic storage system for them. So anything that's in tank has the ability, as you might notice from some of the dimples in the stainless steel, that's all a temperature control system. So we can not only get our wine through fermentation, clean it up, but throughout the winter, we can basically rest it at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So
you have an exact number that you can keep it at and control.
Absolutely.
Because especially with the winter, it could be, especially North Carolina. I remember my first winter here in 2005. I don't know if it dipped below 40 degrees in Charlotte.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That was a very warm winter. And then 2 years ago, it was like blizzard shut down, coldest 20 below it could ever be. That's the thing with North Carolina being where it is, very middle of everything. That the winters are just erratic.
It's true.
Temperature is the most important thing for you guys in the wintertime, I can imagine.
Yeah, so there's a very interesting game and a really good topic as far as, we'll start in the vineyard, as most and all things related to wine. It's all about the vineyard. In here, we're taking what greatness came from the field. And in a particular year where we'll have really, really cold winters, as you're referring to, we can often suffer tissue damage in the vine itself. So, for example, coming out of the 13-14 winter, we had actual damage on some of the vines, and we had a little bit of a lighter crop last year. Whereas the 14-15 winter was cold, we didn't hit very sustained chilling, deep chilling. So thankfully we had great bud counts as far as what we were looking to produce fruit this spring. And here we are in September, and it's definitely fully realized. We're seeing a fantastic crop so far. And from that, last year being 68 tons, this year we're looking at 90 to 95 tons.
Oh, wow.
So those winter temperatures can really affect what you get year in and year out. On the flip side, as far as the cellar goes, we keep this building pretty cool, but it definitely benefits in the middle of winter. It's probably more like 45 degrees in here, and then through the summer we use a chilling unit to keep it at about 55. So the barrel room itself never really fluctuates. It's a cold place to work. You get used to you either get used to the temperature or wearing something to keep you somewhat warm in the meantime. But yeah, and this area itself is, we can grow grapes that produce a lot of freshness. We're looking at fresh fruit flavors, not necessarily the really raisined, overripe flavors that you might get out of a little more of an arid climate. So, and that's something I'm really happy to work with. The wine styles that we get from our fruit, they have a lot of balance, and they're great in their youth. And so it's a very nice opportunity.
You talked about how it all starts in the vineyard and stuff like that. And I spoke with Alan from St. Paul Mountain Vineyard in a previous podcast.
Fantastic.
I don't know if I quite understood everything that he said about viticulture. So hopefully maybe when I ask you the question, I might understand the answer.
Definitely.
But when you say when it starts in the vineyard, what are the things that about this area in North Carolina that, makes it ideal for growing grapes for wine?
So first off, it's a ground up mentality. You've got to consider your soils, and then I would say outside of that, think of where you're growing the grapes in relation to the area around you. So is it in a low spot? Are you on a hill? Do you have good drainage? In addition to that, are you getting good sun exposure? If you're planting your vineyard in the shadow of a mountain that only gets sun from noon to 7, that's probably not the best growing site. And so all of those things in combination are extremely important for growing great grapes. And for us, we have a very high clay and clay loam content in our soils. One of the benefits of being in the mountains here is we also have a good bit of rock content, and that very large material in the soil allows for a little bit of an easier drainage. There's still no doubt that clay holds on to more water than like a really sandy soil. And that's largely what we see here at our estate planting. And then our namesake, our 8 acres on Burntshirt Mountain, that vineyard is over 1,000 feet higher than where we are currently. It has fantastic slope and aspect, and that's basically just saying the way the elevation relates to the sun in the direction that it faces. So it's a south by southeast facing. That area is very, very high in like almost large rock content, and so again, you're getting better drainage out of that soil. And the reason why you talk about all that is because that's where the vines get to spend their entire life. They don't get to pick and choose when if there's high rainfall that they're going to be sucking all that water up. It's a plant. At the end of the day, water is definitely what it needs. Thankfully, grapevines can survive with a little bit of a lower watering content, so it's not something where a traditional crop you have to go out and irrigate it. I would say that in some places this past year they may have been using a little bit of irrigation, but for us in the mountains, we had plenty of moisture content for our fruit, and so that was something we didn't have to mess with much because high rainfall makes that plant obviously do what it does best. Lots of growth. And when you start getting a very full canopy, it's going to be something that not only shades the fruit itself, which you want to get a little bit of sun exposure in there, but also the life of the vine almost exists in a previous year basis. So if you don't get good sunshine on the inner parts of the vine, it doesn't exactly communicate, chemically to where it's going to want to put its growth out in the coming year. And so it's something that at the end of the day, it's sunshine, it's soil, it's rain, it's humidity, all of those things come together. And for us, the grapes that we do grow, I would say have been somewhat vetted. For example, you would not find a very happy Pinot Noir producer in Western North Carolina. It's too much rainfall. I think that the humidity is too high. It's a thin-skinned grape, and even in places that do produce it, it's called the heartbreak grape. So it's not something that comes easily. And so the places that do produce it are celebrated. For us, one of the grapes that we really enjoy growing is the white Austrian varietal Gruner Veltliner. It produces a really nice, great cluster. The structure of it is somewhat open, so you get good air movement. The fruit stays nice and clean. Another grape varietal that is originally out of southwestern France, the Pyrenees area, is Petit Manseng, and that is it's a lot of fun to work with. It has a ton of versatility, very similar structure. The cluster is open, get good air movement, and it actually has this really interesting characteristic where it produces a very high sugar and very high acid content. So for us, we let that grape stay out there as long as we can let it hang on the vine. Last year we picked it on November 20th.
Oh, wow.
After, the first snow was November 1st.
Yeah.
So we let all the leaves fall off the vine and basically just went out there and made sure every day that it was still doing all right. And eventually we got to the point where we basically had raisins. And so when we pressed it, we got a very, very high sugar content juice. The fermentation itself came out to be very high alcohol with high residual sugar still left in it. And it made this honeyed, rich, heavy style of dessert wine. And that's usually what we'll be using it for. So, those are two that are fantastic to see growing here. And another really set of grapes that we have focused in on are the Bordeaux grapes. So, and I don't use Bordeaux to offend them at all, but it classifies the grapes like Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Merlot, and we actually have 2 rows of Malbec. And we're looking to pick that tomorrow, actually. So it's a fun lineup of fruit to work with.
Okay. I understood all that. Which you would say so because I grew up a son of a farmer. So I grasped all that knowledge. Like I said, when Alan explained it, I didn't quite grasp it, but I grabbed what you said. So obviously it makes me wonder, what type of background did you have before you came to Burntshirt? Were you involved in agriculture at all or farming or anything at all?
I was not. So my background, after high school, I have an undergraduate degree from Georgia State in business and with a concentration in real estate. So absolutely not focused in my undergraduate on agriculture. But in close to 2010, 2011, I decided I would like to have a change in career path. And I sought out a program that is a couple hours east of here, actually, in Dobson, North Carolina. It's Surrey Community College. They've got an associate's degree in viticulture and enology. So we're talking technical application. You start off, all of the information you're covering is basic details related to viticulture, which is the agriculture of the vine, and enology, which is the chemistry of wine production. And then in the 2-year study, your coursework takes you from being very book related to, if you so choose, to actually applying your effort. So in 2013, I worked the harvest for the school, and we did, so to speak, everything. So you get to go out at 5 a.m., pick some fruit. Later on in the day, when the rest of the class shows up, you're actually getting on the crush pad, processing the fruit, and then moving it into tank and starting your fermentation process. And then throughout the end of the year, you do some small cellaring work. And then in the spring of 2014, I worked with the school to prune and treat some of the acreage that they have under vine. So there's an original planting of 5 acres with an additional 3 acres that should have been coming online this year. Mm-hmm. And their production facility is about 2,500 gallons in size. It's a really nice, micro setup. It allows you to take the concepts and principles that, if you understand how you're working with a 250-gallon tank, you can use those and extrapolate them up to a 2,500-gallon, 5,000 or 6,000-gallon tank. And it's that practical application that really, to me, for this area, allows you to get your feet wet. And so I finished there in May of 2014 and started here last year. So 2014 was my first vintage here at Burntshirt.
Oh. Okay. Well, it sounds like a great scam if you get all these students to do all the labor, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
It's experience shrouded in the fact that you get, not only that, but the students got to understand that it takes so much effort.
Yeah.
It is something that if you're not 100% into it, you're going to get burnt out.
Yeah, and a lot of educations, you read things in books and then they send you out in the world and then you do it. It's
Exactly.
better to get that education by doing something.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
But like you said, you were involved, you were thinking about real estate and stuff like that, but what made you the jump to learning about viticulture? What was the thing that, like, hey, I should do this? What was the thing that was a tipping point for you?
So the tipping point for me personally was when I was in high school. I had an experience that was very unique, made a huge impression on me. I spent some time just traveling with my family, and I was able to see some parts of Western France that are involved in wine production. And
I guess Mom and Dad did pretty well if you got to go to Western France.
It was for a relative's wedding, and so we were kind of combining a little bit of cultural experience into a family visit, and so it was a all around incredible experience. And during that time, we were actually able to go visit a producer that's on the left bank of Bordeaux, or the left bank of the Gironde estuary. And when my dad was in his mid-20s, he actually backpacked through Europe, and he worked to harvest for them for 2 weeks. And we went back to the same place, and there was just this very real kind of family connection for me. And so after that, coming back to the States, I've also had an opportunity to visit Western California, or the San Francisco area, also for a wedding. Explored some wine regions while we were out there. And just the curiosity in and of itself grew from there. And largely before I went into studying business in my undergraduate, I was heavily interested in science. So I almost made the exception for business because it was a business school. It seemed to make sense. But for me, science is at its heart. That's the thing that I am most interested in.
So it was the science of it that intrigued you. Am I right? Or was it the fact that you could get out there and work with your hands? Or what was it that was romantic to you?
I was about to say there's always something romantic about it. And it's creating something with my hands. It's something that I get to take a product and transform it and ultimately have people enjoy it. And that's when it goes full circle, when I get a chance to see people serve them a glass of wine that has come out of this facility. It is extremely rewarding. And I think that at the end of the day, it's got to be a little bit romantic, a little bit scientific. You got to find that balance between, what the numbers tell you and what your artistic side kind of wants to be. And the better you can control that and walk that fine line, I think ultimately you've got a sustainable product.
Well, let's talk about this facility. How long had Burntshirt been in existence before you came here?
Excellent question. So Burntshirt was originally planted, the estate vineyard, in 2009. And so in its infancy, the idea being that Burntshirt could produce grapes for another large institution in this area, the Biltmore. And very quickly, the idea of just selling fruit developed into the idea that they could actually grow and become 100% estate grown and produced. Mm-hmm. And so that is a very unique thing that I'll kind of circle back around to. But in 2011 was the first year they were actually able to harvest some fruit. They had, kind of a small array of what they'd grown that they were able to produce some wines from. And in those first few years, they did work as a custom crush agreement. So they were harvesting their fruit, taking them to a separate winery. And at that winery, they were able to process and cellar and get all that stuff taken care of and essentially bring a bottled product back here for sale. Mm-hmm. And then in 2013, they really took the next step in growth. The vines were old enough to where they were producing enough crop to warrant essentially their own facility. And so in 2013, the winery was constructed. This facility itself was set up and I would say ready to go by the time fruit started coming in, but I'm pretty sure it was one of those things where grapes were coming in on the crush pad as construction workers were kind of gathering their things and heading out the front door. So it was, kind of nip and tuck in that aspect. But the facility itself, now going into its third vintage, has really had an opportunity to grow. We've found what works well for us and what doesn't work well for us. One of the things that we're really excited about, as far as even in our red wine program, we do small lot fermentations. So as opposed to doing the solids and everything into a tank, we will do our small macro bin, maybe 3/4 of a ton of fruit in one bin, and we'll do the fermentation each different varietal in those bins. And that's something that allows us to get a little more complexity going into the final product.
Mm-hmm. So when did you say you came here, like as far as the process goes? Like what year?
I started last spring.
Last spring.
Spring 2014.
Okay, so they've been around for maybe about a year or so at the time, or at least this facility.
Correct.
So were you part of we need some people that know what they're doing, and then you were the person that they kind of brought in for that, I'm assuming?
So actually, I started on the property after finishing school. I started on the front of house. So I had the opportunity to be in the tasting room for a few months prior to transitioning into this facility. And my predecessor, actually, he moved moved largely into working on the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest in Oregon. So in his absence, I transferred over here and took over control of the facility and actually moving what lots we had still on the property towards being a final bottled product, and then just receiving that fruit that showed up last fall. So last fall we were about 2 weeks further ahead, or you could consider it behind, essentially. Mm-hmm. So this year we are moving along ahead of schedule in comparison, and I think that largely has to do with the weather we've seen over this growing season. And so last year I hit the ground running. This year I've been a little more prepared for what's been coming at me, so it's been nice. Yeah,
because you kind of figured out and see the bumps in the roads. And what were some of those first growing pains, like right off the bat for you with making that transition?
Oh gosh. So some of the first things that I really kind of bumped into literally were, the days we were out there processing. We had a little bit of a smaller press at that time. The first day I jumped on the forklift and grabbed my first bin of fruit, I think that there were probably 3 or 4 things that were blatantly wrong going on in the crush pad that I was just almost ignoring. And you could say I almost had the shakes going into it because it was just the first time that I'd really had the chance to get out and work with that volume of fruit on my own. And so there was a lot of first harvest jitters that I had. And getting through that first round of, whites that we had, I started to feel a lot better about it. And then next thing I knew, we had red grapes showing up on the crush pad. And the few things in particular I would say is just that sometimes you get going so fast you might go to load up the press and not even have the press pan under the press, and then you've got juice going on the ground. And so and vice versa, if you accidentally go to dump your fruit and you don't have the dump bins under there, but instead the press pan, you're going to have a bunch of grape solids in your juice pan.
And do you handle those mistakes well? Because I make those mistakes all the time. Like sometimes I'll plug audio cable in the wrong channel and I'll have no audio on something, and then I turn to this monster and I don't know what to do. But how do you handle those dumb little mistakes that you learn just by learning the equipment and the things you do?
You really have to be open to to take a schedule and a set task and know that something could possibly go wrong, and at least just take a step back for a second. Because as long as you are moving along and kind of, keeping your head on your shoulders, for the most part, anything that you run into, you can fix. And I think there have been very few occasions where there's ever been any major issue that I've run into that we couldn't recover from. But for me personally, being in this facility and time is so important. Mm-hmm. It's, everything is about timing. That's when I probably feel the most pressure. Is if I'm up against the wall, it's late, you're trying to get out of here, and you can't cut corners. You've got to be able to say, okay, well, how I do one thing, I've got to make sure I finish it up the exact same every day. Mm-hmm. And so it's occasionally comes down to taking a deep breath, maybe brewing a pot of coffee, just step back for a second, and then take a new aspect to it. So.
Yeah, but almost I do this thing sometimes where I almost prepare for something bad to go wrong, so that way I'm still on schedule. Like you said, timing is everything. I mean, the harvesting is on the timing, the fermenting, and everything else is on a very timed schedule. And if you don't hit that, there are big problems. Do you almost, when you schedule things, you're thinking, okay, well, let's do this a little bit earlier. Let's do this at this moment in time in case anything happens. I know I've done this 10 times before or 100 times before, but let's just do this a little bit earlier and do those type of things. Is that the way you prepare for something like that?
Absolutely. Day in and day out, I'll end up with so many tasks that I decide that need to be done and have to be done. Yesterday was a great example. We had this barrel treatment to do. It took the majority of the day. And at the end of the day, I still had chemistry that I've got to look at from our active fermentations. And that was something that was pretty much off my radar. Mm-hmm. And so by the time 5 o'clock rolled around, it was like starting up a new thing. And so you definitely have to plan out what you can work with, and trying to think a couple steps ahead, because those issues show up, just like you're saying. And it could be anything. It could be the fact that, for example, with some of the pieces of equipment that we use, we've got a new piece on site this year that is, it's called a Lee's filter press. It essentially allows us to extract more volume from our raw juice that we're pulling out of the tank. And the first day I used it, it sprung a leak, and there was juice spraying everywhere. And it's one of those things that if you don't just look at it as you've got to work through this in order for it to not happen again, that's the best way you can approach it. Try and learn from everything.
Yeah.
Looked like a fruit fly got you there.
Oh, got me right in the eye. Flew right in. And I have a very, very big eye phobia, so having LASIK surgery was an ordeal, and I think that was the second worst ordeal, dealing with my eyes. But I'll trudge on.
We've got a few of them in here, so pardon our guests.
It's quite okay. It all comes with it. But how large is your staff here that you work with? as far as like at least in the winery part?
So in the winery aspect of it, during harvest, it is myself and one other individual. And so we need to have at least not only two sets of eyes on everything, but the ability for somebody to, say, be running the forklift as well as somebody on the ground, kind of making sure everything's where it needs to be. In addition to that, on the production side, I also work with a gentleman based out of Virginia, a consultant winemaker, and he and I largely discuss the 30,000 foot aspect of it and where we'd like to kind of guide the wines, and then from there, it's my task to go in and make sure that from 5,000 feet we're executing on all of those.
Well, how do you guide the wines? You just said how do you guide them?
Excellent point. So, the best way that I could look at almost addressing, treating them, making sure that they are moving forward is to look at things like, where's your sugar content? And what we're doing is we're converting sugar over to alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so it's something that the sugar content is almost like the fuel. And if you know how much fuel you've got left, you can kind of watch how much longer it's going to take for that thing to finish up and, what steps need to be done at that time. And with a few of our wines, for example, we had some small barrel fermented whites that I was working with. Yesterday, I checked on one small lot and it had burned through all the sugar. So it was time to treat it with SO2 and move it into cold storage so it can, kind of rest up until I can top the barrels off. And so in one respect, you are physically moving some things. In another respect, in our tank fermentations, it's about moving the juice to one tank, and then once your fermentation's done, you're moving that wine into another tank. You've got some cold storage steps you've got to consider that are going to increase your settling, and I largely see each one of those as trying to just drive not only the wine along but the quality up, and making sure that the final product is what you would like to have as a tool, essentially, because we have wine styles that we're deciding we're going to produce, and you've got to have all of the colors on the palette, so to speak, in order to work with them. So things come in separate lots, and then we're pushing them towards a final product, and they don't just show up in the cellar as a finished wine, and that's, to me, largely what I see as pushing a wine or moving a wine along.
Mm-hmm. As far as like your staff is, back to that, is like the people that help you out and stuff like that, are you able to delegate responsibility pretty well, or you take a lot on yourself because it's going to take longer for me to explain it to you to get it done right?
That is that's a very, very good question, because it does come down to the fact that ultimately there's certain things that the chemistry, the measurements, the actual application process of certain things, I will largely hold on to that, because that's my check and balance towards making sure that what's going on in that tank is what I want. Mm-hmm. And outside of that, there are so many auxiliary services and processes that can be done. And this year, I'm very, very thankful for a gentleman who's helping me out, and he's able to see things that they've got to be done down the road. Really, in this facility, it's 90% cleaning and 10% is just the other stuff. Yeah. So at the end of the day, you're cleaning tanks, you're cleaning the press, you're cleaning.
Because it's those impurities that are going to spoil it more than anything else.
They can.
You can regulate everything, but it's really about keeping everything clean. I imagine that's a big part of it.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, you can kind of look at it as we're bringing a product in here with sugar in it, with acids in it that are all food for things that we can't see but are likely, on the walls and the floor and floating around in the air. And cleaning is just your first line of defense in making sure that what ends up in contact with the stuff that you want to make this nice, clean, floral, flavorful product, that they aren't spoiling it. And so it's something where First off, we're cleaning it. We're using a high pH solution to remove the soils, a low pH solution to neutralize it, and then we also work with a compound. It's ozonated water. So we have an ozone generator, and ozone is considered kind of the destruction of all microorganisms that it comes into contact with, and that definitely helps us increase the cleaning efficacy of this place.
Okay. And pretty much there's not a whole lot you can do if something starts to get in there. It'll just rot. There's not a lot you can do to fix it.
It's one of those things that prevention is 10 times easier than curing it. Okay. I will definitely say that. And the easiest example is something like a barrel. Mm-hmm. A barrel, when it's full, as I was saying, you've got wine, you've got ethanol in contact with all the surfaces, keeping it nice and full. And then when it's empty, it's almost a playground for all sorts of things that want to grow in there.
Something has to fill that space.
So,
and wine isn't it?
Yeah. And so we actively burn sulfur wicks, which release sulfur gas inside the container. So an antioxidant that helps keep any kind of, aerobic growth from taking place. And when it comes time to refilling them, the sulfur that might be on the surface, we will rinse it out before putting wine back in there. And it's something that's very seamless in the final product. It doesn't show itself, so to speak.
Okay. So, we've talked a lot about the fermenting and how we just get the wine to the point. Now, as far as the bottling goes, is that how big of a process? Do you bring extra people in for that? I mean, does this place go crazy when we talk about bottling? Yes. It's like I can imagine that is the most insane part of it as well, is the bottling process.
Fast and furious is the best way to handle a bottling. So for Burntshirt in particular, we are able to and decidedly work with a mobile bottling line. So what that means is we contract with a gentleman who's got a very, very nice rig, and it's in the back of a semi-tractor trailer. So we schedule a few days for him to come set up the bottling line. The bottling line parks out on the crush pad, and essentially we are working towards that date, because when he gets here, we have to have the wine ready. Mm-hmm. And by ready, it's stable, it's been filtered, it's ready to go into the bottle.
You have to have it booked in advance. You have a deadline. You have a very specific, we've got to do this. We can't wait another day. We can't let it go another day. It shows up here, which is, I guess, them just showing up with it is very nice, because you don't have to find a place to house that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That just shows up, and then that goes away, and then you have all that space again.
Yeah.
But there is that side of it, if we had this another day or another week,
Your flexibility is, to me, it's a double-edged sword, because when he shows up, we can package 1,500 cases in a day. And he brings the bottling line, we've got to have everything else in place. Mm-hmm. Outside of that machine, if it were to be on our property, would largely sit collecting dust for months on end. Mm-hmm. Because you can only process wine so often, you can only stabilize wine so often, and for us, it's the idea of batch processing. Say a lot. You could take this past run, we did 7 different wines. To be able to take 7 different wines to bottle over the course of 3 days, and on the result, the backside have 4,500 cases of wine, is a feat. That's a lot of work. And so if you were to have your own bottling line, it's something where you would almost be dealing with it as a tank at a time, or several tanks at a time, and you would greatly inflate your staffing. So we bring in a handful of folks to help us out. On that day, we have close to 7 employees on site helping us on the truck, because our bottling line, Landwort Bottling, Gary is in the back. He's in the truck making sure that machine's running the way it should be.
Yeah, that's his job. You have somebody.
We got to be on the outside.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
which is nice, because then, if you had your own machine, you've got to figure it out. It's another piece of machinery you have to worry about and maintain and keep up and clean and everything else. You have somebody whose sole responsibility and job is that piece of machinery, and he deals with it probably on a very large basis.
Oh, absolutely. He knows every nook and cranny on that thing and how it should be running just right. And it is exactly what you're talking about. You run into an issue that you have to troubleshoot on a day with the bottling line. That's not a good day to be out working on the line when you should be running wine through it. So for us, it's something I'm very, very happy to work with. And as it was said during one of his recent visits, there is a red and a green button on it, but there's a ton of stuff in between that can go wrong. So it's a very, very nice opportunity to have to work with Gary.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about how like you try and keep the wine is the best condition possible so you can get it to the bottle so it can sit in the bottle like perfectly in a sense. And that's the ultimate goal, I assume. So it's in the bottle and it is the best you can possibly make it. Are there certain like flavors that gain over time if you have like the bottle sit for however long, or like if somebody bought a bottle, like, oh, I'll save this for 5 years, do flavors pop up, or like I don't know exactly how wine would work that way.
Yeah.
Or is it just best like buy it and then drink it that night? Is it a fresh thing, or should you let it sit and you're gonna find some extra notes to it?
For me, it's something at this facility in particular. We take wines such as our white wines, and those are meant to be consumed in their youth. They're best young. Their flavors are bright, they're fresh, the wine's clean. That's when a white wine is meant to be consumed. We have one style that could kind of fit into the exception. We do a reserve Chardonnay. It's barrel fermented. It's given a little more time to really develop that toast and spice and vanilla that comes from the oak barrel. That's what that's a white wine that you could probably look at for 3 or 4 years if you wanted to. It's great now, but if you wanted to wait, you could. On the reds, we try to hold on to them for 12 to 24 months in barrel so that when you buy the bottle, it's ready to consume. And the development that would happen from buying that bottle off of our shelf, and then if you were to hold on to it for a few more years to drink it, you're looking at largely the bright fresh fruit flavors are going to start to tone back a little bit. You're going to get some almost fig or like raisined flavors out of that as that wine ages a little bit. And also, you might notice the color. The color will change from being this bright, vibrant, garnet characteristic. And as it oxidizes, it actually starts to take on a few, tones of almost like a golden or a brown color to it. So any wine that you've held on to for 4 or 5 years, as long as it's the right style, you should definitely expect to have some change in flavors between when it was packaged and when you finally open the bottle.
Yeah, but ideally, buy one and drink it that night and then come back the next day and buy another one.
Yeah,
ideally.
I like that idea.
Ideally. So anyway, speaking about that, like where can people purchase, like as far as your distribution goes, like where are you guys sending out to? Like where can people get their hands on Burntshirt wine?
So our wines are available 7 days a week in the tasting room. And in addition to that, this year, 2015, we started a wholesale program. We have a fantastic individual working on the wholesale program, and so we have started to work our wines into a few small wine shops, some here in Hendersonville. We have a few in Asheville and also a few by the glass service programs. We are looking to offer some of our wines at some of the local restaurants here in Hendersonville, such as, Poe House is one of them. If you were to go into Asheville, Appalachian Vintner has a few of our wines on the shelf. And it's, a little bit at a time. We are slowly working on getting some recognition out there. I think the one concept, the last time I was in a bottle shop last fall, I inquired about the local wine section, and the gentleman behind the counter told me that they just weren't any good. I take that with the idea that, let's drive that ship, let's push the bar, let's make the highest quality. And now that same shop is actually carrying 4 of our wines, and so it's something where I think that it's not only recognition, understanding, and year in and year out, the quality is going to change. And so you take a glimpse at something one year, it's not to say you should completely write it off. And so for us, we're largely seeing our wines available in small restaurants and wine shops. In Hendersonville in particular, Sage Gourmet is a shop that you can buy some of our wines in. But at the end of the day, I like to invite everyone down to the actual facility itself. If you were to come down here any day of the week at 2 o'clock, you can not only do a tasting, but you can take a tour of this production facility. So you walk on the ground right here in between all the tanks, and then you get to take a look at the barrel room and really get an understanding of where everything comes from. So going to the store shelf, you get a little bit of a backstory, and that's a unique opportunity that we have to offer to our customers.
Yeah, and obviously it's coming from the source in a sense. I'm sure, as I've learned through talking to distillers and brewers and people that deal with wineries, the idea of giving your product that you put your heart into to a distributor that might have a 17-year-old stock boy leave your cartons of wine out in the sun for 2 days because they're like that, and then they just put it on the shelf, and then somebody buys it and Burntshirt isn't that good. It was actually not very good at all. But I'm sure it's probably concern and a thought in your mind as well. Is that the thought process of maybe hey, instead of being in every supermarket in the area, is that the thought process, let's keep it small, or is there thought of growing to a large distribution?
So the consideration right now, we are still being in the first year of our wholesale program, we are self-distributed. So the sales happen after multiple visits, after a few tastings, and then when the product is purchased, it's delivered by our wholesale rep, and she's taking product out to each one of these places and trying to build a relationship with them, in the sense that the relationship almost develops from the larger distributors. Those relationships are across a huge portfolio. You're looking at almost competitive shelf space, and you're looking at the fact that distributor is walking in there with so many items that they're looking to sell, and they might know what the tech sheet says on the product, but to be able to walk in there and, if Madeline comes back to me and asks me a question from a customer, I will go at length to help answer that for her. And on a few occasions, I've even gone out to make some of the sales calls myself. And it's an opportunity to hopefully, really from my hands to theirs, give them a product that they're able to put on their shelf and have well represented. And you're right, when you get to a certain volume, you do start to see that the sales have to be supported by selling off product to somebody who's using warehouse storage to push your product to a broader market. It's not to say that couldn't be down the road at some point, but for right now, for us, the local market is our main focus. And I feel that within 50 to 60 miles of here, we have our best representation as far as a customer understanding what we're all about, because given any Saturday or Sunday or Friday afternoon for that matter, they can come over here and visit. And so we've got a real connection to our customer. And that's, like you said, what ultimately allows us to basically go from our storage cellar into their store shelf. And so, on a few of our wines, one wine in particular, we make a 100% Henderson County apple wine. So it's made from juice that all comes from here in the county. This past year, we made 2,700 cases of it. That is by far the largest volume that we have on site. But that's a wine that we've seen tremendous reception from our customers for, and it's something that if you're in the middle of apple country, it almost makes too much sense not to have something like that. So that's another wine that we're very excited about, and it's a style that I've done a little bit of research on myself to try and better understand it and see what it is that separates it from some of the other traditional fermented apple products, and really excited with where that wine is right now.
Okay. Well, let's talk about what's down the road in the short term. What a future outlook of Burntshirt? What are you looking to do here in the next couple of years or so, as far as growth, expansion, or anything else that you're like, we need to keep our eye on this prize for right now?
Absolutely. So some of the stuff that's on the horizon, we have really learned a lot in the past couple years as far as what's growing well and what kind of acreage we would like to increase and what wine styles we'd like to increase. So first, starting on this end of the business, I will definitely say that this facility itself is really geared up and ready to run. We're looking to the vineyard to narrow down some of the grapes that we're using for our actual wines. As far as our reds go, we're very happy with the reds that we have and the acreage that we have. Some of our whites, we may increase our plantings of white grapes. And on the Mountain Vineyard, that vineyard was originally planted to whites and reds. The elevation really limits some of the ripening that we can get on the reds. And so I think that we will look to convert that planting to largely white grapes. It grows fantastic white grapes up there, and move possibly a few more acres of reds down to the estate vineyard here. And in addition to that, outside of the winery, this year we now have the ability to serve some light bites and food. So we have a food truck that's on site, so you can not only come in and enjoy the wine, but have something to eat. To me, it certainly rounds out the experience, and I think that's a huge asset for us. And in addition to that, as far as our guests go, they're able to come in and join us, sit on the patio, enjoy on a Saturday some music, some food, some wine. And when you're sitting on our front of house, as you saw this morning, you're looking right out over the estate vineyard. So it's something where we're really trying to fine tune our customer experience. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, with the wine styles that we're producing, this year, or in 2013, we blended a new red, a high-end red for Burntshirt. It's a licensed Meritage, so it's a blend of Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. It's the only wine we're going to put our Malbec into. And we are really looking to try and drive the envelope on that in the coming years. So we're wanting to increase the complexity of it, the richness of it, the fullness of it, and really make that just a rock star of a red wine for Western North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And then from that, we also have, the development of our Cab Franc. We've also made a reserve wine. And then outside of that, just some really nice, fantastic fruit-forward styles of red blends. The reds are probably where we have the biggest ground to make up because they take the longest time. They've got a cellar. The fermentation process actually takes time, and they're in the world that we compete in. The wine world is exactly that. It's global. So if you were to put if you were to pour somebody a glass of red wine and they think that everything is supposed to look like a Central California red blend, then, there might be misconceptions as to why the color's a little bit light depending on what our varietal blend was. And so we, I think, have a huge hurdle to slowly work on not only bringing new wines to our customers, but also, lowering the misconception and lowering the fear of them wanting to learn about it. And so getting to show people more and more styles that we think are truly representative of Western North Carolina.
Yeah, and the best way to learn is to come out here. I mean, it's a fantastic facility. When I pulled up here, it was very large. I was on one end of it, and you were on the other, so that's why we were a little bit late starting this. And it's just a fantastic picnic area. There's just walking around and a wonderful view. I highly encourage anybody to come out here and take a tour. But as far as if anybody wants to take a tour or they want to know more about what Burntshirt is doing, how can they do so? What's the website information, the social medias? Please give that information now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us online at burntshirt.vineyards.com and Facebook at Burntshirt Vineyards. And you can come out to our property here on Sugarloaf Road in Hendersonville, North Carolina. We're open 7 days a week from 12 to 6, and then on Friday and Saturday from 12 to 7. And if you come at 2 o'clock each day, you can go on a tour of the production facility. That tour starts at the tasting room, and then you head on over and get to see the inner workings of where everything's coming from. And if you want to keep up to date with anything that we have going on, we also have an events section on our website. So it's a little bit of an events calendar, so to speak. And coming up this Saturday, actually, we're doing a little grape stomp. So we're going to have some people having the opportunity to jump in a bin and Lucille Ball style jump in and stomp some grapes. And then later on in the year, we actually have an offering to take customers up to our Mountain Vineyard. So we do one day where everybody has the opportunity to go up there and have a bite to eat, drink some wine, and see what the view's like from 3,400 feet.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Justin, I can't thank you so much for taking time out of your day for this wonderful conversation, and thank you so much. And I encourage anybody to come out to Burntshirt. So thank you very much, Justin.
Absolutely.